Alright everyone, have you ever had something that was useful in the past, but with maybe a tear in your eye at some point you sort of have to close the door on it? That's the case with our current immigration policy. I've done a lot of thinking for years now about this particular issue. And at risk of people who have pink hair and Che Guevara shirts claiming that this is evidence of bigotry, I'm just going to come out and state my opinion, which is, and it's changed somewhat, which is that our immigration system, which was largely formulated in the 1960s, no longer particularly makes sense. What we've got is a system in the United States where we've had several phases of immigration in the United States. Initially, there wasn't really a solid immigration system at all in our early years. It was basically if someone was meritocratic and sailed in on a ship from an allied nation, they could just sort of stay there, and there wasn't really a problem. And there were certain things they had to do to go through. Had to sign up and make sure that the people know who you are actually. Like, yes, I was born in Worcestershire over there. Other than that, though, there wasn't a lot, and most people couldn't immigrate. Then in the 1800s, when we began industrializing in the United States and railroads started connecting the coasts, we realized that we had an enormous amount of unused land that was farmable, mineable, and otherwise exploitable from sea to shining sea, an entire fucking continent. When we realized how empty it was, they're building rail lines, you need people to fill in and make little villages and towns to service the needs of the rail workers, to sell them shit, which means you need local farms for food. It means you need mines for salt, for coal, other fuel. You need stone, you need lumber. You need all of the supplies that you can get, and you can get them locally. It's a lot easier than having them shipped in on the lines you're still building at the time. It's a lot more efficient. It's a lot faster. The Homestead Act was passed. The Homestead Act essentially said that a person who was otherwise, they'd be quarantined if they had a cough or anything. If you were reasonably healthy and you were able and willing to work, you could claim your land and start farming. And if you fell through, well, that's okay. Nobody's going to really buy your land except for pennies because it was free at the time. There was so much of it. So the idea was that only the meritocratic few would come, and also people from urban areas took advantage of this as well. They could get their slice of the pie and say, I'm tired of picking pockets here in New York City. I'm going to go try and be a farmer. I got $10. I can actually afford a substantial farm. Land was so cheap back then that even the average laborer with a couple of weeks saving up some of their wages would have been able to actually buy a farm. Now, they'd have to build their own house, of course. It required considerably rugged individuals. Build your house, buy your livestock, get your seeds at loan probably and hope that the rain falls. But it worked. It filled in the country. Millions and millions of people immigrated through this process. And all of them were European because we weren't allowing anybody else to come. Later, there was literally, I think, a Supreme Court case over whether people of Finnish extraction were white and therefore counted, and stuff like that. So you get into a little bit of dicking around minutia. In the 1960s, we decided to reformulate our immigration policy. You see, what happened is that before it was primarily hardworking European diaspora. That was your immigrant base. In the 60s, we said, we need to fight communism. We've still got all of this empty land. We need even more people. We're going to let anyone come in here as long as they're not a communist, number one, which is still asked on our immigration forms today, believe it or not. Not a communist. They're not hyper, like they don't have a communicable illness like AIDS or whatever. That's still a disqualifying factor. They're not a criminal. And then, we're going to try to get in people who are smart, student visas and stuff, transfer over to residency, willing to work in the military, certain trades, like if there's a shortage, we need 1,000 doctors stat, so we need to get more doctors in from somewhere else. We retooled our immigration policy to try to maximize the economy to prevent the temporary shortage of labor within industries. The free market will take care of it. It just takes longer than bringing somebody in artificially. We decided that to maximize efficiency against communism, number one, to brain drain the East, number two, and to make communism look bad by showing off how many people wanted to come to the United States, simply just optics at that point, number three. In the 1960s, we passed immigration reform to allow more people in. specifically under merit, student, things of that nature, as well as migrant work, again, to increase output. But there's no Soviet Union anymore. The United States is a monopolar power that reigns over the only considerable military bloc in the entire world, which is NATO. We have the biggest navy. We have the best air force. We have, other than Russia, which is trying to modernize to some degree, we have, the most powerful nuclear arsenal. Technically second, but there's no Soviet Union to back it. We have a major economy, which is growing at the moment. We have the most diplomatic relations. We're the guarantor of the world's shipping lanes. We're the most innovative when it comes to most areas of modern technology. Since you no longer have to worry about outstripping the Soviet Union that doesn't exist anymore for manpower, and since there's no longer any compelling reason to believe that we have a perception problem with regards to tolerance or diversity, there's no longer any reason to have that particular immigration system. What I'm proposing is that we kick it out the door. We do away with it entirely. Not with immigration, but with that kind of policy, because it was based on the 1960s and 70s principles of the West versus the East that doesn't exist anymore. Now, you have a world where increasingly you have overpopulation, and our goal should be to grow but to slow it down to outlast other people and not suffer a demographic collapse. That's the next looming problem. In order to do that, it's quite clear what you need to do. We don't need to bring in people to fill in industries to maximize efficiency. It's not necessary anymore. We've got enough domestic manpower to make up for it. You can do it temporarily. You could have an NAU sort of thing with Canada and Mexico, and we could sort of trade workers on a temporary basis, and you wouldn't need permanent immigration for that purpose. We're already drawing closer together anyway. What do you think the Real ID thing, your driver's license, you can go to Canada or Mexico anytime you want. You don't need a visa or a passport or anything. It's already drawing closer together for trade and diplomacy. You've seen it. Trump abuses the president of Mexico, still gets invited over. There's a reason for this. We're congealing our bloc, in other words. The northern part of the American hemisphere and the rest of NATO, essentially, along with several extended alliances in Eastern Asia and Latin America. It's already happened. We don't need 1965 version immigration laws anymore. What we should do is this. Temporary movement of people to take care of those industries, because there will always be a shortage there's a shortage of widget refiners in Texas, and you got plenty of extra widget refiners in Ontario, but Ontario needs maple tree cutter downers, and so you trade off the manpower. You can actually do that fairly easily without any permanent movement of people. There are always some asides. We should always have our door open towards the upper echelon of meritocracy. Like someone with a PhD, they're in a country where they might be persecuted. Okay, bring Albert Einstein over, so to speak. That's one thing, strictly merit-based. Relationship-based, and I'm not talking about your third cousin happens to be an American. I'm talking through marriage or childhood, and that's really it. We're already tightening up our restrictions with regards to the birth tourism. That I support. There's no reason why a person should be able to come here for the sole intent of having a child, therefore becoming a resident very quickly, and then going back to wherever else. In the meantime, that's not justice. It's not tolerance. It's not being nice to people. It's not helpful in any way to other countries or to the U.S. Really, it just pisses everybody off. So your spouse is an American. There's a child involved that was not what you would consider birth tourism. It was inadvertent or something along those lines. Your resident gave birth, lapsed in residency or something, so it's tying you to the U.S. in some way. High-level merit, and then basically military. But again, the number of people that would come into the United States by joining the military and working their ass off for 4 years is relatively limited. Yeah, I think that if someone's willing to fight and put their life on the line, we can fast-track some degree of temporary residency for them. It'd be conditional, don't break the law and so forth. As far as the more immediate problem with our immigration system, it's twofold. Number one, we have a lot of deferred action individuals in the country. Now, deferred action doesn't mean you never make a decision. It means that eventually you do, and you've deferred because there are bigger problems. We're solving those bigger problems, which is what gets the Democrats really pissed off right now because they never wanted to solve them. The other is the border wall. If you have a continuous border wall, one that works, one that is being built currently, that actually functions better than the kind of barriers we had before, that takes a bit out of the problem, eases everything else. The problem is that we have sanctuary cities and states, number one, and number two, you do have people in the country that have no real ties to any other nation. They're technically illegally here. They were brought over when they were 3, 4 years old. They weren't born in the United States, but they were raised here. They speak just English in some cases. They've gone to a U.S. college, held U.S. jobs, paying back taxes. They're functionally American. They don't really have any ties to anywhere else because they simply haven't really been there. In fact, if they ever left the U.S. and went back to that country, they wouldn't be let back in, which is why they stay in the United States. Some of these people don't even speak the native language of the place that a lot of people would like to kick them to. But once you solve that problem, it should never become a problem again. We need to tighten everything up, and therefore, what you would have is fewer immigrants, and for those that still qualify, you haven't broken the law, you're not a commie or anything like that. Yeah, we should keep banning commies. We should deport the ones that are already in the U.S., including those that are already citizens. Just say, well, you've renounced your citizenship. We're sending you to North Korea. I'm half joking there. Not a commie, transmissible illness, not a violent criminal or a felon or whatever. And that depends on the state, too. You can be a criminal in France by criticizing Islam. Well, that should be not a reason to restrict somebody. U.S. Citizen or lawful resident spouse or something along those lines. And for the few cases that are left, you can fast-track them. It shouldn't take fucking almost a year to immigrate through that process if you're doing everything else right. Most of the people taking advantage of that process in some cases are European anyway, so I don't see why it would necessarily piss off the ethno-nationalistic crowd out there. But we need to show the 60s the door. It's not the Cold War anymore. It's not boomer land any. The boomers aren't little kids anymore. Now the little kids nowadays have to compete with a bunch of people who are illegally in the country because nobody wants to actually enforce existing immigration law. If you're not going to bother enforcing it, get rid of it and replace it. Get something enforceable. That's what I suggest. It has nothing to do with race. It has nothing to do with even national origin. It has nothing to do... A lot of people, if you suggest reforming immigration, they call you a bigot. Well, that's funny. Back then, if you suggested reforming it, you were called a Nazi or a commie or something. Well, that wasn't the case. It was reformed by people who were fundamentally America firsters who simply wanted to outwit and outmaneuver the communists. Well, it worked. The problem is we don't need to be doing it anymore. We got enough native manpower now. We've got enough things to be doing in the United States. And as far as the wider net of visa-free travel or something, I realize somebody can overstay a visa. Somebody can come into your country as a tourist and just never leave. Absolutely. The liberals are right when they say that that's a problem. But is it the same as people who are marching across the border in trains of thousands or tens of thousands? No, it's not. It's not the same problem, and we have ways of dealing with that as well. We do. It's topical. It's not actually that difficult. It's just that there's no willpower to do it. Because the left-wingers, it's not like New York City is exactly doing a hefty amount of screening of people on international travel, the same way that you'd get in maybe a Texas or something. Now, it's just a lack of will to respect the laws as they've already been laid down. Even the weakened globalistic laws that we currently exist under are not even listened to. That's about all. Peace out.